In this DCS SITREP update, ED gets a hotfix out there to address high CPU loading in the main menu. We finally get a development progress update for the F4U 1D Corsair by Magnitude3, and Wags is interviewed by Pimax regarding VR optimization in DCS world in the pursuit of realism. Welcome back to the DCS SITREP once again, the news show on the world's premier combat flight simulator for the home PC. It's known as DCS World. The game is brought to you by Eagle Dynamics and its third-party affiliates. And once again, I'm your host, Prickly Hedgehog. Let's tuck into the newsletter this week once again, which began with information about a quick fix update stemming from last week's big patch and user feedback. As some of you began to notice, performance in DCS took different turns depending on your system, with some users reporting reduced performance and/or issues with increased system heat and CPU loading following that patch. One issue that cropped up was the high CPU loading even in the main menu. This issue has been addressed though in this latest patch, which is great news. Now, the forum thread on the topic saw a flurry of discussion about possible causes, possible solutions, fixes and workarounds, and revelations about individual user experiences. Now, the bottom line was that the issue, according to Big Newy at least, was a bug and that they were working on a solution as part of that hotfix patch, which, as I said, we saw this week a solution to. Now, one of the curious things was that it wasn't necessarily a universal problem, which compounds things a little bit. Initially, it appeared to be an issue for only AMD users, but reports came trickling in about Intel CPUs also being affected. Now, in my rather unscientific survey of about 140 odd users, approximately 50% of you confirmed a heat and/or performance issue, with approximately an even split between those people using AMD and Intel CPUs. The good news, though, at least in terms of troubleshooting, is that the ED team were able to replicate the issues people were reporting. And at this time, the issue, as I said, should be resolved. So thanks to those of you willing to take the time to report and send in your logs for ED to digest and resolve the problem. Now, how they described it in the newsletter was that they have written a quick fix for high CPU load that occurs on the main menu and was observed and reported by community members after the last update. They have also included quick action generated changes such as random skill level to AI and a fix for missions not regenerated even when the regenerate button is pressed. I expected there were going to be tweaks to the quick action generator system based on feedback and any bugs that may have creeped in. Now, we also solved a couple more long-standing issues they advised and added them to this update. These include things like track replays not saving properly and an infantry disembarkment issue when a mission is running on a dedicated server. And then finally, issues with the multiplayer scoreboard not updating properly. That has also been resolved. So some good news there. Certainly, if you're still having problems, I presume there will be another forum generated of some kind. Let me know if you experience this problem and if it was resolved for you in the comments section below. Let's move to DCS and VR, where Wags is interviewed by Pimax. It was a 25-minute interview that I thought was pretty interesting and most pertinent, of course, for VR users, but also contained a couple of gems worth noting, and it was covered in this recent interview with Wags by Pimax's Jaap Rolleman, who is the main face of the brand for Pimax, just as Wags is for ED and DCS World. Now, without a doubt, VR is an embellishment for DCS that completes the immersion loop and illusion for those wanting to feel like they're really inside the jet, and it's no accident it's done so well in DCS World. Now, Wags described that a lot of work has gone into ensuring that DCS is compatible with VR, and Jaap actually went on to say that it is one of the more optimized games out there for the VR experience. So the aim is to mimic reality, Wags said, as much as feasible within the context of a video game and the constraints of the technology as it exists right now. He described that the team jumped into VR very, very early in the DCS development road, as they recognized that it was the best way to improve immersion well beyond what 2D could possibly offer. He indicated experience with military simulation systems for a variety of aircraft, such as the Viper and the Hornet, and believed that the VR immersion experience that DCS is offering rivals those experiences that he has had. So he cited friends of his who worked with real jets who often lose themselves within the game in VR, forgetting for a moment at least they're sitting at a computer desk. And that's what it's all about, just enough suspension of disbelief to drag you into a different world for a spell and mimic, as described, reality as best as they can. And I think they have achieved that, and I have to say VR is absolutely fantastic for DCS, and I've made this statement many times. And again, I want to thank Pimax for helping me have that experience with the Crystal Lite and the Crystal OG, which has been simply amazing. Now, a couple of things to note for the broader player base is that WAG's indicated ED is making good progress on Vulkan being implemented, along with, as we've seen, improvements to multi-threading capacity by bringing more cores online for multi-core CPUs, or at least these modern CPUs, which the original game was not designed to run on. Now, Vulkan will allow the team to better unlock hardware performance with the game engine as opposed to DirectX 11, at least in theory. As always, individual results will vary between users' systems because of hardware variability. How far the team are along exactly with that Vulkan development is still under wraps. I suspect their ability to unlock CPU cores with modern CPUs, their ongoing work with GPU optimization, which they introduced with Terrain software last year, remember, will be critical elements to building worlds that simply blow flight sim experiences away in the genre right now, especially within VR. Now, I suspect that the Vulkan progress and certainly the CPU and GPU optimizations that we talked about are going to likely be critical for the dynamic campaign. Whether or not we see the dynamic campaign is still unclear. Remember, it was going to be possibly a Q4 type release, so naturally they definitely won't release it if it's not ready. And so some of these other things may be in play in terms of making sure it's a usable feature of the game, and it will be a huge boost for replayability, something that we've discussed in the past. Now, getting back to VR specifically here, one of the things that came up as a huge boost is foveated rendering. Now, I've seen gurus, VR gurus at least, call this a must, especially in graphically demanding games like DCS World. And this came up as a discussion with Wags and Jup with regards to the Crystal Super, which is really Pimax's flagship headset right now. Now, in simple terms, what is it? It mimics the mechanisms within our own eyes, where what we're focused on is naturally enough in very high definition. What's on the periphery, though, is not. And this takes the strain out of the PC, basically having to produce everything within what is technically the field of view in very, very high definition, which again is demanding when you're talking about extreme field of views and very, very high pixel counts. In other words, a lot of detail. It's a strain on the system. Remember too, because you are producing two images, because you've got two small screens that you are beaming that data to, plus also the main screen, which is also being projected to. So there's a lot of demand on both the CPU and the GPU, which is why some systems can't necessarily run high detailed VR. They just don't have the power. So foveated rendering, though, makes this a little bit more accessible and realistically able to be rendered and still giving you pretty decent frame rates. Now, if you combine foveated rendering with things like Tobii eye tracking, which is built in to sets like the original Crystal, then you get very close to what a pilot can see within the cockpit. And again, this is mimicking the realism that Eagle Dynamics and DCS World is trying to create. And this is, again, is why VR is such a fantastic experience in DCS World. And I do recommend it. If it's something that you're kicking around, you can't go back to 2D, basically, once you've jumped into VR. It just changes the game completely. Though there are some traps with it in terms of expense, in terms of equipment needed to run it, and then also perhaps potentially having to update your virtual desktop, because if you don't have some sort of pass-through system, it's hard to, well, you can't really see anything around you. So it does change the flight experience, but ultimately the pros outweigh the cons, in my personal opinion. Now, regardless, though, of what headset you choose, whether it's a Pimax or some other well-known brand, these features, I think, are a must if you're chasing performance in VR and also other simulation games. I'm not sure if I'm going to get my hands actually on the Super at this point from Pimax. It's getting competitive out there. There's a lot of content creators out there, and I guess there's only so many VR headsets to share, and I'm a small channel. I don't have a huge viewership, unfortunately, so maybe Pimax will be kind enough, but for now, I may end up having to buy my own headset. We'll see if the finances stretch that far. It is, regardless, VR, it is a really hot commodity, both for entertainment purposes and also commercial purposes. I spent 2 days earlier this week as an instructor recertifying in what is known as a less than lethal weapon system, where VR was a large component of the training curriculum. I've been an instructor in that particular piece of equipment for about 11 years now, so it was cool to see this new technology. I shouldn't say it's all that new, but seeing this technology used for the first time in the training component was massively beneficial. In fairness, while it's extremely useful, the graphics that I was experiencing for this particular training were pretty primitive, really, compared to DCS World. And yet, it was a massively useful tool in getting repetition for training purposes in a commercial setting at just, bargain basement costs, where each cartridge that we were using, if you like, for this particular system and the weapon that we use is around about $75 a cartridge type thing. So, I'll let you make the guesses there as to what weapon I'm talking about. Maybe one of these days we can talk about some of the stuff I do in real life, but we're not quite there yet. Now, I'll post a link in the description below if you want to see the full 25-minute interview with Wags and Jup. It was an interesting one. And again, illuminating in terms of where DCS is headed, what it's capable of, and the bright future, why I still, really do believe in this franchise and why I enjoy it so much, because of this degree of realism. And it's getting more and more accessible. I think one of the challenges, too, for games that have been around a long time like this is that the technology changes, too. Every 5 years, we get a major boost in performance, whether that's the CPU things that we were talking about before, certainly the GPUs. GPUs particularly, are really providing the opportunity for games like DCS World and other simulation games to create worlds that are so much more realistic than we could have only dreamed of, 15, 20 years ago. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. As always, let's switch gears and talk about the Corsair update, which is one fans of the aircraft have been waiting for years now, and one I think that is long overdue, but obviously there were some hurdles, so let's talk about those hurdles here. Since 2017, believe it or not, many of you do know, Magnitude3 has been dedicated in an immense effort to bring this iconic World War II fighter to DCS World. It played a pivotal role in the Pacific Theater of Operations, or PTO, and it became a symbol of aerial prowess thanks to its speed, climb rate, and toughness. It even had a smaller role in the European Theater of Operations. Now, developing this module has proven more challenging than Magnitude3 anticipated. The Corsair's unusual design was revolutionary for its time, and its flight dynamics are complex. This combination of a powerful engine and huge propeller, its distinctive gull wings, large flaps, and its robust landing gear that also acted as an air brake created a challenge in airflow dynamics and handling characteristics. This would be particularly important around the boat, where you have other factors to consider, particularly that low-speed handling, the possible burble off the back of the boat, those kinds of things as well. So some complex calculus going on there for the team. They solved it though, and the quote here is that while perfection is an elusive goal, we do not claim our flight model, FM, to be flawless, we acknowledge that there is always room for further refinement and improvement. However, the current flight model has been thoroughly validated and closely mirrors the real aircraft's behavior, surpassing the realism of any previous Corsair flight model developed for flight simulation. It only gets better. So currently we have a few remaining items on our development list for the module. For example, the implementation of the bat bomb, for which the initial implementation is complete. Further work will ensure its seamless integration into the DCS environment. Remember, this was a semi-autonomous, I guess, early drone-type bomb that could be launched at distance to a target. We often think of drone wars as being a relatively new technology, but some of this kind of stuff has been around for quite a while. And we know this from, Germany's work, Nazi Germany's work on guided bombs and rockets that struck the British mainland. Not entirely new. So key features, though, in regards to early access, we're going to see a high-quality external 3D model. We're going to have a fully clickable cockpit with 6 degrees of freedom and the latest visual effects. Cool. Flight dynamics based on the official report, CFD research and pilot feedback, engine and propeller control systems, fuel system and optional external tanks, electrical system, hydraulic and pneumatic systems, radio navigation systems, structure-based damage model, carrier-capable aircraft, and there will be a English PDF manual. Early access weapons include 6 by 0.50 inch or 12.7 millimeter M2 Browning machine guns, 8 by 5 inch 12.7 centimeters high velocity aircraft rockets or HVARs, external fuel tanks and bombs of up to 4,000 pounds or 1,800 kg. To enhance the Corsair experience, Magnitude 3 will include, and this is a big one, an Essex-class aircraft carrier. The ship class was pivotal for PTO components of US naval power, and it was one of the most numerous capital ship classes of the 20th century. Of the 24 Essex-class carriers built, none were lost, actually, to enemy action, although several sustained significant battle damage. These carriers were veritable fortresses at sea that could carry approximately 90 aircraft on their armored hull and decks. It was also equipped with numerous weapons for self-defense. In the version of the Essex that we're going to get in the game, we're going to have 4 by 127mm single cannons, 4 by 127mm twin cannons, 17 40mm Bofors guns, 20 by 20mm twin Oerlikon guns, and 50 by 20mm single Oerlikon guns. Magnitude 3 will introduce 8 Imperial Japanese ground units. That includes things like trucks, anti-aircraft artillery, and tanks, which will be a fantastic addition to the upcoming free Mariana Islands World War II map that is being worked on by Eagle Dynamics. The AI Corsair Essex-class aircraft carrier and Imperial Japanese ground units will be available for all DCS players to ensure single-player and multiplayer compatibility. Final quote from the team: as they near this significant milestone, they wish to convey their deepest appreciation for the remarkable support and enduring patience throughout these dedicated years here. This project, without question, represents the longest and most demanding endeavor that the team have pursued within the DCS environment. So, as I said, this is hugely encouraging news for DCS fans of the aircraft who have been demanding updates and progress reports. I don't think almost any DCS SITREP goes by where somebody doesn't ask a question about it. I believe one of their biggest challenge was in the flight model, and I know from anecdotal evidence that was one of the big problems that they were trying to resolve. And as I've said in other interviews and other discussions, that component of aircraft development in the game is one of the more difficult things to accurately recreate. Furthermore, it also has to pass the litmus test for realism before it can be injected into the game for sale by the ED team, let alone, of course, the feedback that the community is going to give. Now, once it is released, we no doubt will get feedback from the community, and you can expect probably further tweaks on that. So stay tuned. I'm excited. We don't have a date yet for early access. It will probably come after a couple of things. One will be the MiG-29A Fulcrum release. Then, of course, it's going to coincide with the release of the Marianas map, the World War II version of that, of course, and whatever assets Eagle Dynamics has. And the other thing that has to be managed here is we also have the LA7 in play, and of course Eagle Dynamics' Hellcat, so we can't dump all those into the game at the same time without potentially hindering the sales for the individual teams involved. So there's going to have to be some management of this, whether or not, you know, we see one, both, or all three of those aircraft in game is still up for, you know, question. I doubt we'll see the F6 Hellcat this round. Maybe it might be a 2026 release. So we'll have to see what comes of all of this. Stay tuned, really, is the short answer. Now, given that we're talking Corsair, I know a lot of you are still waiting for and keep asking about the A7 Corsair 2 by Flying Iron Simulations, which is the modern namesake of the venerable original. Now, earlier this year, the team did confirm that work is ongoing on that project. So don't fear if you were worried about it dying or disappearing, or, you know, we've had bad news with teams disappearing in the past here. However, they said that they are tied up right now with the work that they're doing on their Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 projects, which is to be expected because they have quite a few irons in the fire over in that franchise, and that has dragged some resources away from the DCS module. So the Corsair is still being worked on, and they advise they will be pouring more efforts back into that project as soon as they can. And they apologize really for earlier this year for not, being a little bit more transparent. They just were super busy, and this happens in these smaller teams because everyone's tied up working. So they advise they will be pouring effort back into that project and will update us as soon as they can. So expect some good progress on what's already achieved there, apparently, and stay tuned for more on that. And of course, the Corsair F4U1D in the near future, hopefully the very near future rather than, a later future. Well, this brings us to the end of another DCS SITREP. Thanks again for tuning in. We live in interesting times, I think, with regards to where things are headed. Very interesting interview with Wags, hinting at some of those developmental processes that are going on in the background. And with the technological advances that I said before, we have, this constant evolution of the game and what's able to be produced, which I think complicates things in some ways, but in other ways it unlocks greater potential for the game to produce the kinds of experiences that are, not really available in many other franchises. It's an exciting time to be involved in flight simulation with all of these swirling differences, if you like, all the swirling development, technological upgrades, and as time wears on, sometimes too, other aircraft that weren't previously available to produce are effectively accessible. And one of those, funnily enough, for a lot of people, is that F-35, which Wags is researching as we speak. So stay tuned for more information on DCS World, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.